Hi and welcome to December's Youth Work Conversation. Welcome from all of us here. We'll just go around and introduce ourselves. I'm Liz from the Diocese of Leeds, part of the Children and Young People's team.
Is it me next?
Yes,
Hi, my name is Mike North. I am the Children's and Young People's Advisor for the Diocese of Sheffield.
Annabelle.
I am Annabelle. Just before the summer, I finished up being a youth worker in Doncaster, part of the Diocese of Sheffield, and currently training to be an ordinand at Bristol at Trinity College.
Hi, I'm Bob. I'm a curate over in Leeds, and I used to run a youth camp. Well, I helped run a youth camp for 30 years and done lots of volunteer youth working before ordained ministry.
Thank you. So welcome to today's conversationalists, if that's even a proper word. Before we start our conversation today, thinking about how we support young people in their spiritual journey, Mike's going to pray for us.
Yeah, let's pray. As people still join us, you're welcome. Keep joining, share the link. Heavenly Father, we thank you for each other. Thank you for your love for us. We thank you for technology that can connect us, even though we're spread all around the country. And we pray today that you'd help us to have a helpful, insightful conversation about spiritual direction and mentoring. We pray that those watching would find it inspiring and something that they can contribute to too. So thank you for the opportunities and be with us as we share. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Mike. And just to say, if you're watching this live, please do get involved in the conversation in the comments. And if you're watching it back, please do the same, because we will keep engaging with those during the week. So before we start, as in good tradition of these conversations, we've got a little icebreaker. So I'm going to ask you all, what is the most unique thing you have within reach of your desk? And who would like to go first?
I don't mind going first. I was given this gift. It's a waving Pope toy, which is on my desk, so I always have the Pope waving at me as an encouragement. It's from a head teacher.
Thanks, Bob.
I think that is quite high up on the random scale, isn't it?
Not sure how we can beat that, to be honest.
Yes.
No, I don't think I can either. Who would like to go next?
I'll go. Literally within reach. It's not very random, but the socks are drying next to me, so I do have my sock rack attached to the radiator, and as you can see, lots of different colours, including black, and there's some red.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
Annabelle.
Well, I just opened the drawers of my desk, and it's very fitting for Christmas, I think. So I have some jingle bells in my desk. Not very sure how they're very useful for stationery, but there we go.
Clear winner.
Yeah,
they're on theme with the Christmas tree.
What's Liz got?
Mine's quite boring compared to all those. I've got a bowl of godly play people.
Oh,
Wooden people.
they're lovely.
You'd never know you're a children's worker, Liz.
You never would. So it's always nice to see what other people have got on their desks, and I always end up thinking mine's a bit boring. I think we'll call it a tie for they were all quite random and lovely in their own ways. So, as we said, we're thinking today about spiritual mentoring or direction or accompaniment for young people. During the pandemic, we've been thinking quite a lot about discipleship and how we support young people, which has been somewhat challenging in some areas, and particularly we've all been saying we're all still in tier 3, so it's quite challenging now. But one of the things I've noticed is that in our diocese, people who give that sort of support to adults have lots of training if they're spiritual directors, They are on an authorised list, and it all seems very different to how it works with young people. But I thought our first question might be, how would we define spiritual mentoring or accompaniment for young people? I don't know who would like to go first.
I was thinking, kind of pondering the question, that actually spiritual direction is a very specific thing as an adult, while mentoring feels much more of a wider set of issues. So I don't know how many of us have had spiritual direction. You know, I have to have it regularly. Probably should have it every day, really. But you know, it's very specifically about your spiritual practice and how that's going. And of course, it crosses over into the other aspects of life, and also, you know, kind of into my own personal discipleship. But I've never ever heard anyone say use spiritual direction for children. And actually, I think it's a really, really interesting, really good way of thinking about things. Thinking about the kind of youth camp stuff that we did, it was at a Franciscan monastery, so there was a kind of like spiritual rhythm to the place that we had our camps on, and that the camp kind of fitted in with that. And actually, that's become a backbone of my own spirituality, and also for a lot of the young people. So to start to think about your spiritual practice, I think as a very specific, very narrow stream, is actually really fascinating, and kind of like a whole new avenue, you know, because we think about mentoring, we think about how you're doing with your praying to God, and generally, but this very, very tight and specific kind of stream of thinking, I think is actually quite exciting, you know. So that was my initial thoughts on hearing what we were doing today.
Thanks, Bob.
Yes, I sometimes wonder if we interchange all these different terms. Depends on what pops out of our mouth. But I think when you do stop to think about it, as Bob says, that spiritual direction does have much more of an agenda than sort of general mentoring. And maybe we use mentoring a lot, do we, in youth ministry? We've talked about mentoring on these conversations a couple of times in the past. But yes, spiritual direction does seem much more sort of discipleship based. What is God saying to you? Where should you be going? What should you be doing? I think those are the kind of questions that I associate with spiritual direction. It's much more in that realm, rather than how are you, how's the dog, and you know, what's on the telly tonight, which could be valid questions in a mentoring conversation. I don't know. What do you think, Annabelle?
Yeah, I do feel like mentoring has become a bit of an umbrella term that we use to cover a lot of things. Like discipleship has kind of been swallowed up into that. Quite often we call it like youth mentoring now rather than youth discipleship, even though what we mean is youth discipleship. And then people get really confused sometimes when we're like, oh, we just play games. And then people are like, oh, I thought you were doing a Bible study, or the other way around, and things like that. So I do think it's important to kind of flesh out what our understanding is of these different things. But I think like spiritual direction has a really good place in youth discipleship. It's very intentional and focused on like one aspect of supporting a young person in their development. We do a lot, I think, in youth work generally to support the well-being and kind of general life of a young person. And discipleship tries to tend, you know, to focus more on how they live as disciples of Christ. And then even more specific, I think spiritual direction is kind of helping them to guide them in their relationship with God.
I think one of the things about spiritual direction is it's very much driven by the person themselves. So it's very much about asking someone else, asking the kind of reflective questions to get you to own your own faith and your own development, and kind of hinting at ways to go. And I'm kind of quite excited by that with young people, because often I feel, I'm sure it's not the case here, but you know, you've come across programs in churches for young people which are very directive, and we're trying to get them from here to here, rather than teaching them how to actually develop their own spirituality and take responsibility for their own direction. And that's why I quite like the term, that it feels slightly different to, you know, just teaching or the more general mentoring. So what do you think, Liz?
When I was looking, the thing that I liked that I found was it was the idea of journeying with somebody else and encouraging them in their relationship with God. And I think that's a little bit different to your average, the sorts of programs we've run. Well, Bob and I have run some together in the past, where you'll look at a topic and you'll think about how that affects your life, but it isn't that thing about taking ownership and, okay, so when did I last have a conversation with God? And I liked what you said about the rhythm of life, and the rhythms of prayer and that sort of thing. So yeah, I suppose I'm interested in what it would look like. What does good practice look like? Because I don't know, because I've never genuinely, I don't think, sat down and thought what I'm doing is youth direction or accompaniment. So I don't know if people have got thoughts on what good practice would look like.
I thought one of the comments that we've got on the stream is talking about, like, why do we use some of this language with adults but not when we're referring to children and young people. And I actually, I like you, Liz, I kind of looked up what do we even mean by this term. Just being honest. And one of the things I really liked was so it's about being with people as they attempt to deepen their relationship with the divine, or to learn to grow their own personal spirituality, and to listen to the person and ask questions to help direct them in the process of reflection and spiritual growth. And I think if you asked a youth worker, they'd probably say they do that in some of their discipleship that they do with young people. They probably call it something like journeying with young people. I think that's a word that we use quite a lot. So I think maybe hearing the term spiritual direction can feel like maybe that's something that youth workers don't feel qualified to do, or it's a scary thing to think about doing with a young person, but actually they're probably already doing it.
Thanks, Annabelle. I think that's really helpful. It's certainly something we've been thinking about in our training. We don't do anything that sort of looks at the word spiritual direction for young people. But a lot of the things we have in discipleship is how do you walk alongside your young people? But I'm not sure how that's recognised in sort of like day-to-day life in parishes, perhaps.
I think that's one of the things I've written down was this interface with parish life. Certainly running a camp where you're in a religious community, it's the community aspect of the discipleship and spiritual discipline that just naturally happens in community. So I would say it's the community aspect of it that is really crucial for you know, allowing young people to feel safe, to be able to express themselves safely, and to have a variety of views to support them. While in parish life, I think that's quite difficult, because my sense, and not everywhere, is that really what the church wants to see is young people in church sat down. You know, they want to see the numbers and they want to see them there behaving like how they want young people to behave, rather than them expressing their own faith and their own culture and having the space to do that and grow. So, you know, as a kind of church leader embarking on all of this stuff, you know, it's making those spaces for young people to be themselves within parish life, and looking at their support as a community thing rather than just the youth worker. Because I think the best support for young people is when families are working together, when people who, you know, haven't got children who are free working together, where they've got friendships, all together supporting the youth work that's going on. I think that's the most effective way of supporting young people. So this has brought out all sorts of interesting questions about how parish life should work, and how, you know, leaders, vicars, whoever should interact with these questions and with what they're doing. So
I feel a lot of these questions are things that youth workers do grapple with on a day-to-day basis, and it then makes me wonder, is it something that the average adult in a church engages with as well? Does everyone in the pews think that they should have spiritual direction, or is that somehow for those who are in leadership roles only? Because, you know, certainly from a youth work point of view, we would hope that every young person would engage in some kind of discipleship, nurturing, spiritual mentoring, as just part of life. And yet, do we grow out of that? You know, unless you're in a certain part of the church which is involved with leadership, or you're training to be a vicar, or you're in youth and children's lay ministry leadership. I think those things, you know, we do have on our radar, and we do think, yes, it's good to have a spiritual director, but is it an adult wide thing? Should it be, or is it just for sort of lay ministry leadership or ordained leadership?
I just started in September as a ordinand, and this is this like starting this part of my journey is the first time anyone, you know, I have to have a spiritual director. It's the first time I have been kind of told or asked that this is something you should have, and you have to go through the process of getting a spiritual director. But I've been working in church and part of ministry and just being a Christian for ages. So yeah, it's interesting thinking, is it just set aside? Does it seem to just set aside for ordained or lay ministry?
There's an interesting going on, isn't there, Liz, with Leeds Diocese, with the Rhythm of Life program, so which is really about spiritual direction, creating your own rule of life, isn't it? And we've seen it in the parish here. It's, you know, it's really flourishing people. You know, they're really taking their spiritual life seriously. As a youth worker, or as someone working with young people, you have to do that all the time, because you're constantly engaging with people. So you're constantly and that's reflecting back on you. So you're constantly being challenged about your own beliefs anyway, because you're dealing with young people who are beautiful and open-eyed and are asking loads of questions. And what kind of concerns me is that the church is also missing out on that two-way conversation with the culture around it and young people. The great benefit of having young people is that they ask those questions that adults probably would ask, but don't feel they can. So there's this kind of two-way, you know, beneficial thing going on. But I think the Rhythm of Life thing that's going on here is in that direction, a spiritual direction for the pews, you know, for the average person, and we've been seeing it locally doing a good job. You know, I think it's a good thing.
I think what you said about when we work with children and young people, especially, that intentionality about what does faith do in your life, that happens almost at every session, because it's like, you're going to tell me about this particular thing in the Bible, so how does that relate to me in wherever I am and what I do in year 10 in my school or whatever. And I wonder where that stops, because I think it does stop, because in grown-up church sometimes you don't have that. And I wonder, actually, the church doesn't realise some of the blessings where there is active youth work, where we are engaging with young people, getting them to think about those things. But the fact that it hasn't got a slick title or seen like that means that it's missed.
Or does some of this get picked up in home groups, if a church has a home group system, or cell groups, whatever they might call them? There is a little bit of sort of spiritual journeying with others that would happen in that context, not necessarily on a one-to-one basis, where you'd, you know, pair up with somebody who you consider, you know, a little bit further down the track of faith, a little bit more mature, and is able to help guide and encourage you. But yeah, I wonder if home groups is as close as that a lot of churches get to that sort of accountability relationship that we're talking on. It's interesting on the chat, there's a number of comments people are picking up on just the word direction and how controlling that word seems as a word. And maybe that's why it doesn't appear too much in the world of youth work, because it really grates when you think of somebody being a spiritual director. I will direct you spiritually, which of course isn't what we've discussed anyway. That's not come under the definitions that we've outlined. And maybe it does for some people. Maybe some people feel that, you know, you should meet with an older, maturer Christian to tell you where you need to grow next and what you need to do. But I don't think that's a general understanding of that term, spiritual direction. And so that word can be a bit of a stumbling block, I think.
I think that's right. And I think actually, as somebody who was encouraged to have a spiritual director, I was quite scared when I got it, because I thought that was somebody who was going to tell me all the things I did wrong. And it wasn't like that at all. So I think for adults that have it, it's more the relationship that we're talking about that young people have with their youth leaders and things like that. We just don't perhaps recognise it. One of the things it did make me think about, and I think the word accompanying is much nicer, or journeying, because that's more about what it is, I think, is the amount of effort that goes into train and resource, and also, if you like, authorise adults that work with adults, and how it works in relation to young people. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, because there's a whole range of people that get involved in youth work, and I wonder if they're as well supported perhaps, or whatever.
I guess if we're being honest, that work is more important than the stuff with adults. You know, when you're dealing with a young person, they're more vulnerable, they're more open to stuff. As an adult, you can filter what things, can't you? You've had some experience, so you can decide what's true and what isn't, and you can do things like that. With a young person, it's a much more responsible position, in my opinion. What you say and how you act can be really damaging as well as really uplifting. So I would have thought that kind of work does need support and authorization. I like the idea of authorization is quite important. As a leader, it would be good to know that people are trained to a certain standard and that they're aware of particular issues. So I'm not saying that everyone should go on like a 3-year degree or anything like that, but you know, like in many other areas of life, on the job training, and where you can do modules or short training courses would be really good. So you've got something to show for it, especially as a leader who's you know, you're coming into a context, you don't know what people are like, what experience they have. I think it would be a good use of resources in the church, don't you think? Really, on such an important work, to have something.
I think there's something around accountability, and I mean that in the nicest sort of way, because I'm thinking of a young person that I'd known for a long time, and came across them, and they were really quite upset by something that had been said to them, which was that they should never go out with somebody who didn't belong to the church. And we had a really lovely conversation about ideals, but they were quite heartbroken. And I said to them, from my own story, you know, when I met my husband, he didn't go to church, he'd never been to church. And they only knew him in a church context.
Yeah.
And so I think, so I don't know about how you do the accountability, but there is that thing of being careful of what we say to people who are vulnerable. because if it's not taken in the right context or as it's meant, because I'm sure the person that was talking to them hadn't said you will never go out with somebody who doesn't go to church, but that's what they'd heard.
There are a lot of risks, aren't there? I think as soon as you engage in that kind of a relationship, that there are risks. Risks both ways. Risks of, you know, the spiritual director saying something inappropriate, or even sort of safeguarding issues coming up. You know, that there are risks, and where there are risks, there really should be training on both sides. So you want training to deal with safeguarding issues that might crop up in that kind of relationship, but you also need training as a spiritual director or a mentor to know what is a helpful way to approach this relationship, how you would set boundaries that you know, clearly defined the relationship so that there wasn't confusion, where expectations were clearly outlined. And I think, you know, that would be a helpful piece of training that any and every youth worker should engage with, possibly regularly every few years, just to remind themselves of the importance of relationship, and doing that safe and doing that well, so that both parties can to move forward, you know, safely, and you know what those expectations are. What is the point of this relationship? Am I supposed to grow in my faith or not? So yeah, I'm a big believer in setting the scene, setting the boundaries, and setting up that relationship well at the beginning. But training, definitely, I think, you know, it's a minefield to go into that without some of that important training.
I think as well, we talked about like using the word, now it's gone out of my head. Liz, you said a word that we could use instead of direction, accompaniment. Yeah, I think by using a different term, so by using the word accompaniment or something, when you're approaching people to volunteer as well, I think that sounds much more inviting, and maybe less scary. Maybe some people might feel scared of saying yes to being a young person's spiritual director, because that sounds like a really big title to have with no training or any guidance. But if you're asking, hey, would you be happy to come and accompany Johnny, whoever, on a spiritual journey, I think that sounds much more inviting. And then providing training, I think as well, it shows that you really value that volunteer, and that you want to invest in them, as well as asking them to invest in the young people as well.
I think, yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go, Bob. It's fine.
I think there's two other aspects that crossed my mind. One is the kind of community and support that the accompanying people, the youth workers have themselves. I think it's really important to have a community for themselves where they can talk about problems. You know, if you were doing other areas of professional life, you have your own colleagues and people to speak to. So I think that's really important, to have a safe place so you can deal with things. But also there's that interrelationship between the young people themselves and their own support of one another. And there's a lot of spiritual direction goes on. It's peer driven, isn't it? And supporting that in a healthy way. I think as leaders or people accompanying and setting those boundaries and showing what they look like is setting a good example for the kind of peer relationships that there are, which is a real issue, as we know for bullying and all sorts of things that are going on in school and around about the place. So I think those are the kind of sideways relationship things which tie into this. Is a community, not just an individual thing.
I think there's something as well about it not necessarily having to be a one-to-one, that a lot of what we've talked about happens in groups quite naturally with young people. It's just not recognised, and it's not maybe resourced as well as it could be with the training. But often some of the best things you'll do will be in small groups. I think about some of the conversations I've been privileged to be part of with young people, and it can just completely blow your mind because of where they are in their faith and in their life. But maybe it's how we equip people to realize what they're doing is so important.
I'd be interesting to know from others on the screen, but also those watching, because I think one of the key points of youth work, especially as young people get sort of a little older, 16, 17-year-olds are starting to think future, what am I supposed to do? And if they are from a faith background and their faith is important to them, they often get to that point of what is God asking me to do? And you get to that really specific question at a point in youth work. I'd be interested to know people's experience of helping young people, spiritual directing young people at that kind of point in their life. What questions do you ask? What do you try and do with and for those young people at that point?
It's a little while since I've had the privilege of doing the hands-on stuff, partly because for my own children, the thought of me being involved in their youth work would be hideous. So I stepped back. I think for me, some of the best conversations were around when you make your decisions, where is faith in that decision? What's helping you decide where you're going? And does what you believe actually have a direct impact in what you do? And sometimes quite as blunt as that. I mean, these are with young people that you've probably worked with for a long time.
Yeah.
But actually there is that openness, and also on the flip side, being able to answer when they say to you, so how does your faith relate to your job then?
Yeah.
Because I think it's only fair that we answer that question if we're asked it as well. And sometimes the answer's badly because I don't get it right.
Yeah. Especially if you're training for ordained ministry, that's true. That's for sure, Annabelle. I'm sure you understand that. Yeah. Again, I think it is walking alongside, journeying with people. If you're honest about the mistakes you've made and that it's okay and that God's still with you, I think that's a big part of it. You know, as an adult, you get very stressed, don't we, about where we're going, what we're doing. The fact is, you know, God is with us through those things, and I think that's what people need to hear, is that, yeah, you're going to mess it up, don't worry, that's life, just learn from it, God's still with you, and when you do, it's going to be okay. But also bringing that kind of into the whole church culture. So quite often it's like churches is here and our work is here. So it's not just a thing with young people, it's a thing with adults, isn't it? You know, we do Sunday and then we go off and, you know, do other things, and making sure that as church leaders, in whatever capacity that is, that we're always talking about the whole of life and our faith in life, not just a Sunday morning or whatever we're doing. So it's creating a culture where, you know, God is at the center of every aspect of what we're doing, whether it's working at a checkout or training to be a priest, whatever it is. Yeah.
Joanne says on the chat how important open-ended questions are, which of course is always an important one. Don't close the conversation down with the way that you phrase the question, but open it up. And Johnny's talking about how if the young person is actually asking, what does God want me to do with my life, then you're actually in the right place. You know, that they probably won't go too far wrong if they're already asking that question. And I asked it, you know, because I thought, actually, I've had a couple of these conversations recently with a couple of people who've kind of come to me a little bit to say, you know, am I doing the right thing? Is this course that I'm on, you know, the right thing for me? Or, you know, how did you know what was the right thing for you? And those conversations, I think, are really, you know, important. And that does give you an opportunity just to share openly. about, you know, how blind so many of us walk through life thinking, I'm hoping that this is what God wants for me. You know, I haven't met too many people who are like, you know, God wrote this on the wall one day and I'm following that. You know, most of us, there's a trust, there's a faith element to stepping forward. But I also think, you know, just asking those kind of questions about what are you passionate about? Where is your heart? You know, what is important to you? Those kind of questions are helpful to draw out, you know, those deeper thoughts in a young person. And I guess I'm a big believer in saying, you know, God's made you the way he's made you for a reason. And you are you and you're not me. So don't try and copy me and follow me. You know, ask yourself, what has God made you for? And, you know, what's important for you that you could look at in life? One of the young people that I was youth leader for many years ago, he's now married with children. And he, you know, we brought in somebody who worked with the Toy Box charity into the youth group to share some stories with the young people. And he marks that evening when we had that guest speaker in, you know, as kind of a bit of a life changer, because somebody else was there explaining their passions and their heart and how they followed their story. And I think that sometimes giving young people permission to say, yeah, what has God given to me? What's important to me? What do I want to stand up for? What am I passionate about? Not necessarily what am I good at school, but sometimes those join up. And, you know, and just spend some time thinking and praying around what could the future look like there is one of my techniques, I guess, if that's the right word, when I'm trying to encourage young people to think future wise.
I think one of the useful things about the phrase spiritual direction, which I know will grate with some of the people typing because of the word, but is the immense depth and history of spiritual direction within the church. So when you look at kind of like Ignatian spirituality, Lectio Divina, there's these practices that have been developed over like hundreds and hundreds of years by people often sat in the desert on their own thinking about God. And there's this like this well to tap into, which maybe we just don't tap into for young people, because maybe we don't give them enough credit that actually they've got a spirituality that could engage with that. We kind of say, this is adult stuff, this is, you know, children's stuff. And of course, the exciting thing is to say a lot of the stuff that young people do, fun stuff, we should be doing in church. And a lot of the really deep spiritual practices and examinations actually young people can engage with. So I think that maybe the useful thing about the spiritual direction as a phrase is it opens a door to lots of practices and things which won't be for everybody, but it is a real resource. And I'm quite encouraged by that.
I think there's something you said there as well, that when I was doing a bit of research for this, the book that I found that came up whenever you Googled is over 20 years old, but it makes a really important point that young people are already spiritual beings made in the image of God. They are not waiting for us to fill them up and point them in the right direction, which I think sometimes people need reminding.
Yeah. There's also the new monasticism as well. I mean, although I think that's a kind of parallel thing alongside this. I'm not suggesting that we get our youth groups to dress in robes and, you know, go into silence for days or say all the Psalms. But I think there is a longing in our society for something that isn't the consumerism and the other stuff that we've been sold. And I think there is a monastic and various other traditions to draw on, which are quite fun. So one of the most popular things at Hillfield, the youth camp, is they love Compline. You know, who would start a youth group meeting with Compline? Well, that's become part of the culture, and after a busy day, they really appreciate it. Now, I'm not suggesting you start an open reach youth work project with Compline and candlelight, but I think it's okay to explore different things. I think there's a lot there to explore and enjoy with young people.
I think while young people are in that stage, you're saying, Mike, of like 16, 18, kind of looking at what does God want them to do as they go off into their futures, it's also getting them to think about how are they going to be prepared to go into that season, and how can we be helping to equip them for whatever it is that they walk into, helping them to realize that having the perfect job or the perfect degree to go and sign up for isn't the most important thing, reminding them that there's more to that as well. And there's great work from people like Fusion, helping to prepare young people who are going off to university and stuff like that, to help to equip them to keep going in their faith. Maybe they've only had a youth worker to walk alongside them, and suddenly that's going to be lost when they go off to uni. I think it's really important to help them, to equip them and give them resources, that they can be using as they go into that season. And I've used like Lectio Divina with young people, and they love it. They get it more than some adults. I think adults get more impatient about sitting and being quiet than young people sometimes. I
do wonder, actually, in our discussion, if the thing that we maybe not uncovered or reminded ourselves is just how much spiritual accompaniment goes on that perhaps churches and church leaders aren't aware of in their youth groups. And perhaps the biggest question is, do we resource and support the people that are already doing the work as well as we could or should? I don't know what your sort of thoughts are on that one as we sort of come towards the end of our conversation.
Yeah, I do think it's a really important area. I'd be interested to hear through the comments section if people do have other resources or training that they're aware of. Do share the love. We'd like to tap into things. Like I said at the beginning, I think we've kind of almost come back to that place. There is a lot of talk and resources around mentoring, and I think mentoring does occasionally touch, on a more spiritual level in the ways that we're talking. But it's important, I think, to separate them out so that we don't miss the spiritual side and we don't just do the more relational mentoring stuff, but actually we address and we're given permission by young people, and we give permission for them to access our spirituality as well and share that journey is really, really important. But yes, I don't have the training package at the moment. I'd be interested if it's out there, or whether actually we should be developing something more tailored to that spiritual accompanying that is so important. Because I think if you don't have the training in place, you won't get the quality that we're maybe suggesting is important.
Thanks for that, Mike. Any sort of final thoughts from people? We're really grateful to you for sharing today.
I think the only thing I'd say is, when we're journeying ourselves and when we're open to God, that's the best gift we can give other people. So when we're vulnerable and when we don't know all the answers, and when we're sharing our own struggles, I think that's a really precious gift that no training can give anyone, and however good important training is. So I think stay vulnerable, stay as honest as you can, and that's the good spiritual direction, in my opinion.
Thanks, Bob.
I was just going to add, I think it can be great to reel off resources and things and look at stuff, but we can't necessarily do that right now because of COVID. We can't always use all of them, and it'd be really cool, I think, to hear in the comments and stuff after this, like as people have been working with their young people during the lockdowns and things, they've probably been doing a lot of this already. It'd be cool to kind of hear people's encouragements of how they've been doing that. And I think we're in a season right now where quite often, we've not been able to go to church, into our buildings, and we have been in a season where we've had to rely on our own faith. And and our own resources that we have. And it's been a really good time to kind of focus on that. And a lot of people, you know, me as an adult, have had realizations of, you know, I probably lean too much on other things sometimes. And it's good to remind myself of how I connect with God in my own spirituality. So yeah, it's a really good time, I think, to be trying to do this with our young people and encourage them. And I think a good resource, can I just share a resource quickly, that I've used before with some young people to kind of ease into this sort of stuff. Youthscape have produced something called the Swap Journals, and I got as much out of that as the young people did. I think you each have exactly the same journal, and it's probably taken me twice as long to answer some of the questions than them, and you swap them with each other. So it's really good to kind of get you thinking about your own faith as well as the young people, and you can have some really honest conversations about how you've both kind of struggled with some aspects of faith and how you can encourage each other as well. So yeah, check it out.
Ali's mentioned that resource in the chat as well, so thanks, Ali, for flagging that up. Yeah,
that is brilliant, thank you. And please do keep sharing those resources and ideas, because we were saying earlier, it's very strange now, particularly for us and for our young people. For some, it's sort of 10 months perhaps since they've met together in person. So there's lots of for us to think about as we move into the next phase, whatever that will look like in the new year. Thank you so much, Bob, Mike, Annabelle, for your time. This is the only conversation in December. I think Mike's just going to give you a bit of a hint of what will be coming next. And then we'll...
That's not to say you can't have other conversations yourself, but this is the only live youth work conversation on this Facebook page that is happening this month. I think our plan is to continue in the new year with fortnightly reflection videos. We've done a few of our reflection videos over the last couple of months. We've been at bus stops and various other things, or we've got some plans for bathtubs, I think, in the new year, but I should probably not say that. So yeah, hopefully they will be a resource that will be good for you as youth workers, but also some of them will hopefully be relevant to share with young people. You can take them into your youth groups or stream them on your Zoom conversations. And even for some school assemblies, some of them might be appropriate for as well. So stay connected to our page. Get the notification so you can see when new content goes up. And as far as these live conversations are concerned, I think we're going to put them on hold until we have some really relevant conversations that need to happen. So they're not going to happen regularly as they have happened in the new year, but as and when things happen in the world, in our country, in our politics, in our schools that demand us to have a conversation around it, we will do our best to keep our finger on the pulse and bring you some brilliant people to have that conversation with, to help us to think the issues through. But yes, that's what next year looks like. I think from us all at the team, we wish you all a brilliant Christmas and stay safe. I don't know if you're at the front of the queue, anyone, for the vaccine when it becomes available to your demographic, but stay safe all the same.
Thanks, Mike. And we hope you all have a very, very happy Christmas and New Year. Thank you for watching.